to solidarity, people before profit. Deputy Richard Boyd-Barrett.
One of the industries and groups of workers in this country, 25,000 of them or so, taxi drivers who have been absolutely crucified by the impact of COVID-19 and public health restrictions, and will continue to be as long as other sectors like music, entertainment, events, tourism and aviation are affected, on which they depend for their income. But their appeals for a specific assistance to deal with the debts they're accumulating, their ongoing costs, and for a financial package to help them survive and recover have been consistently refused by this government. But to add insult to injury, those taxi drivers were planning to come to government buildings this morning at 10 o'clock in a public health compliant protest where they were going to be in their cars, and where they had made it absolutely clear they were going to be in their cars so as not to breach public health guidelines. Despite that clear assurance and communicating that to the guards, on Wednesday, the representatives of the 4 national taxi groups, one of them received a call from Pearse Street Garda Station, where they were informed that if they turned up in their cars, every driver would be fined €100 and that the organisers of the protest could face up to €20,000 in fines or up to 2 years imprisonment. Now, this is absolutely shocking. And this comes on top of the previous Thursday, where the guards facilitated KPMG strikebreakers doing non-essential work in non-essential retail, removing stock and physically removing, in quite a brutal way, mothers and grandmothers who were fighting for fair redundancy. Now, and I could add to that, legal threats against ESB workers pursuing a legitimate fight against the outsource of privatisation in the ESB, film workers threatened with being fined and arrested a number of weeks ago for protesting or suggesting a protest at the RDS. Now, I ask you very simply, is it that we actually have one law and one form of policing for workers who are doing public health compliant protests, trying to secure redundancy rights, trying to secure financial assistance for their industries and livelihoods devastated, but on the other hand, the same guards and laws are being used to facilitate KPMG strikebreakers? So is it one law for the workers and another law for the strikebreakers? It seems to me that is completely unacceptable, Taoiseach, and I'd ask you to respond to that.
Thank you, Deputy Garmagad.
Thanks, Deputy. There's only one law, and those are the laws that are passed by us, including you, here in these Oireachtas, and the Gardaí are responsible for enforcing the laws that we enact here in this Oireachtas, and that's what they have to do. In relation to taxi drivers, I totally acknowledge, and the government acknowledges, that they're among the groups that have suffered the most in this pandemic, not in health terms, but certainly in economic terms. And their business, as we all know, is heavily dependent on tourism, on people attending events, on people availing of hospitality. And as a result of that, they've seen a very major reduction in their incomes. Have met them at your suggestion, and I'm following up on some of the issues that they raised with Minister Ryan. Most are self-employed, and as a result of that, can access a range of COVID-19 financial supports, including PUP and the Credit Guarantee Scheme. And the Department of Transport has waived licence fees for 2021 at a cost of €2.6 million. Taxi drivers eligible for the PUP are also allowed to continue to work and receive the PUP. There's an income disregard which allows taxi drivers to earn up to €960 every 8 weeks, net of any expenses, without jeopardising their entitlement to the payment. This isn't only a crucial lifeline for those who, through no fault of their own, cannot work in the way they did before, but will also be an important financial support for drivers once they return to work and until passenger demand returns to more normal levels. As I mentioned, Previously, Minister Ryan has met with the taxi representative groups twice last year, and understand that officials from the NTA are now in regular dialogue with groups representing taxi drivers for months now. The Minister and officials from his department remain available to meet with taxi reps, as they would with any lobby group or representative organisation. And officials have also been engaging with the Advisory Committee on Small Public Service Vehicles, and that will be attended by Minister Ryan today, the 29th of April.
Boyd-Barrett.
Minister, firstly, taxi drivers have a number of simple demands, none of which have been met. Okay? They've asked for a financial package of supports to cover their fixed costs, which are estimated by the NTA a number of years ago at €11,000 a year. Debts they are accumulating. They've been excluded from the schemes to support those fixed costs. They've asked for a moratorium on the issuing of licences. They've asked for the Taxi Advisory Committee to be replaced with a body that allows them direct access to the ministers. And other demands, many of which are non-financial, including the replacement of the 10-year replacement of vehicle rule with 15 years, given that they've lost their income. None of those demands have been met, and that's why they were forced to organise a protest this morning, which they've now had to call off because they were threatened, even though they made it clear they were going to comply with public health guidelines. They were threatened with being fined, with implications for the future licensing of their vehicles, and with their leaders possibly facing prison sentences or massive fines. Now, I ask you, is that an acceptable form of, or is that not in fact political policing against taxi drivers? And the same point could be made about what happened to Debenhams workers last Thursday.
Thank you, Deputy. Tánaiste.
Thanks, Deputy. I can only repeat what I said earlier, and that is laws are passed here by us in these Oireachtas. There's no law in relation to COVID that didn't come through this House, and the Gardaí are responsible for enforcing the law. And statutory instruments can, of course, be revoked by this House, and I've not yet seen a proposal to revoke any of the statutory instruments that have been put in place since this pandemic began. As I mentioned earlier, Minister Ryan is going to meet with the Advisory Committee on Small Service Public Vehicles today. That involves some taxi drivers, but also involves consumers and other people who have an interest in the sector and in the industry. In terms of issuing new licences, there is a widespread awareness of the acute difficulties facing the industry today. And since the pandemic started, the number of licences issued has declined to a very small number because very few people, understandably, are entering the industry at present. I'm told by the Department that, in view of that reality and in view of the fact that a formal halt to the issuance of licences would require legislative change and may be anti-competitive, the Minister doesn't see how a formal moratorium would deliver any real benefits to anyone at this stage.